What's up, guys? David DeSell here, your host of the Business with the Boys podcast, and joined, as always, with my co-host, Landon Troyer. And Landon, I'm pretty fired up at the time of this recording. I think it's, what, 3, maybe 4 weeks, and I'll be out in your neck of the woods for a bit.
Yeah, buddy. Get ready. Bring your jacket. Whatever Florida jackets look like, bring it. It might still be cool. You never know.
Well, I think because at the end of March, at the time of this recording, so there's a slight chance that I may uh, look like a kid wearing his father's jacket. I may need to borrow one of yours. In
You'd still look
Florida,
like
I've
a
got.
father. You'd still look like a father wearing a kid's jacket with your little ass.
Well, when I moved to Florida, um, I legit like got rid of all my winter clothes. Like I was committed. I was like, I'm not
Yeah,
going back. I'm
it's a
not dealing with the
celebratory
snow.
event, man.
It is so, but I don't think my shorts and tee will suffice over the winter.
Yeah.
It was nice when I was visiting you last summer, going out on the lake and all that stuff. So maybe we'll still sit around the fire all bundled up.
Yeah,
Let's
end of March could still be it could be 80 and it could be 35. You just never know. Good old Nebraska weather.
oh man. Well, for today's episode, we have Alan Tyndall, and Alan's someone who, gosh, I've known for, man, 14, 13, 14, 15 years, something along those lines. We used to work together, and since then have worked together in two different capacities. One, I coached him for quite a while, and most recently, we talk about his real estate fund that he has now. Most recently, invested in that myself. So he's super good dude. He's from North Carolina, and he is a financial advisor. He owns a bike shop. He owns a cafe. He has the real estate fund. He does a bunch of flips as well. And he's just super dynamic, has his hands in a bunch of different things. And actually, him and his wife work very closely together, particularly on the real estate side of things. So, understanding some of those dynamics was pretty interesting in today's episode. But what were some of your takeaways?
I don't know how he keeps all his shit straight. Dude, he has got a ton of stuff going on, right? But I do think it's cool. I mean, I do know how he keeps a lot of it straight. It sounds like um, on the home front with his wife, she's integral in these businesses and running a good majority of them from the day-to-day operation stuff. So that was a cool dynamic to hear. I scratched my head to figure out whether or not my wife and I could work in that capacity. I don't know that that's the case. God love her, but she sounds like she takes care of stuff. He knows his role, and they stay in each other's lanes, right? And that's pretty cool. Um, this fund side of things that he's doing, I think, is brilliant. Obviously, the investment guy in me comes out a little bit, and I love hearing the dynamics and how people are structuring things to try and create yield, create return, and that's a pretty damn intriguing little play that they've got going on there. But again, I just knowing what I do in my day-to-day practice on the wealth management side of things, and then to try and figure out the time and capacity to do everything else, the guy's got a lot on his plate.
He does. And his wife, Dawn, as we were talking through on the recording, I was like, man, screw Alan. We should have just had Dawn on this. Seems like she's running a lot, a lot
She's
of
a
the day
boss
to
in her own right,
day.
obviously.
Yeah, 100%. And one of the things too that one of my takeaways, or I guess two of my takeaways, were he got a bike shop because he loves to ride bikes, like doing something that he's passionate about, and then having a business around that. While also, because if you remember from the episode, he only spends about 2 hours a week on that business. It's about hiring the right people to leverage your time to free that up to go and generate even more revenue. And then there was also, I guess, a third takeaway too, where entrepreneurship isn't all, roses and unicorns. There's been
Not
times
always
where,
pretty.
nope, where he's been in financial pinches, and especially, at the time he had like three different juice bars, and COVID hit. So that obviously took a nosedive. At one point, he was employing 150 people and trying his best to keep the food on everyone's table. So, he goes into that as well. But all in all, I think it's a good story of commitment and perseverance, ability to pivot, and frankly, diversifying different revenue streams while also over time consolidating and arriving at the revenue streams that are generating the most revenue and have the most upside, frankly.
Yeah, and I think, unlike maybe a number of guests we've had on, the fact that he has kind of had to part ways with a business that, let's be honest, it wasn't in a fruitful place, or he would have kept those businesses, right? But you could see and hear in his voice the confliction that he had in, I could just cut bait and run, right? And leave these 150 people out to dry. But I think most of us as entrepreneurs, again, it comes back to the human element. We don't want to do that, right? I mean, there's layoffs all the time, and no matter what side you fall on those, they're not fun. And for him to make the decision of, look, we're going to try and fight through this, I think that's pretty cool. And I think it's the way most entrepreneurs truly are. We care about our people, right? And that was a cool part of his story, and I appreciated him being vulnerable and sharing it.
Of course. And for those of you tuning in, I think you'll not only really enjoy this episode, but I think you might want to share it too. So do us a solid, share the episode, leave us a review if you haven't had a moment to do so. That just helps so much with visibility and credibility. But that said, let's dive into the episode with Alan Tyndall. Who knew I would make it this far? They hated, they never believed me. Yeah, I would never drop the ball. I know I make it look easy. Yeah, Mayweather with the defense. I don't care what a critic got to say. I got them picking up the pieces. That mean you really playing with your life. I'm about to come and run it all back. So, Alan, you and I go way back to our Northwestern days. We were, they have this sort of training that you qualify for called Fast Track. We were in the study group. Then we've worked together outside of that. And then we're currently working together with some of the stuff that you have going on. But I guess just to give a lay of the land, help our listeners understand kind of your journey from, school up through now, just kind of a quick bullet point list. And obviously we'll be asking some follow-up questions along the way, but what are some of the things that you've done up to this point?
Yeah, but we've done a ton of stuff in the last 15, 16 years. I say my wife, because we tend to make decisions together for the most part. And starting back at Fast Track, that was wild. I mean, I got into the internship at Northwestern back at was that maybe early 2011, I think, and ran through that. Enjoyed it. I was tinting windows in college, among other things. I worked at Circuit City for a bit, liked working on cars, but was always, I don't know, I had a knack for selling things and talking to people, but I was able to get passion behind it. It wasn't just an MLM type thing. Yeah, it was all stuff that I could really get behind. And so I actually went and met with my dad's Northwestern guy, he's an older guy up in the Greensboro area. And we met and had breakfast, and my dad was like, "Don't sign anything, they're gonna sign you up for something." But nonetheless, when I had breakfast, he's like, you should talk to everybody about the internship. So I actually applied and then got in. And I mean, a lot of people get into the internship, if we're being honest, but
it feels
most
cool
of them
at the
stick
time.
around.
Yeah,
no, it totally does. It's definitely a step up from, you're a college kid selling whatever, doing whatever to now you have to go buy your first like professional suit, and put it on, which is kind of neat. But so yeah, I mean, I got in it and I mean, I feel like I've always had a really good work ethic, and they said, you need to do X, Y, Z, and you'll achieve, this. And I said, okay, well, that seems pretty easy. And we all know the work's not that easy, right? But it's the effort that goes in on the front end. So I said, all right, well, let's take a stab at it. And I just ran with it, made more phone calls, met more people than everyone else. And I think that after the first semester, we went to annual meeting, and I was number 7 or something like that in the country. And it was on, I don't know, maybe 60, 70,000 a premium or something over the course of that, which I was pretty excited about.
Damn.
So yeah, it was pretty fun. And then, then you got guys that are up there with like 200,000-300,000 a premium as a college intern. You're like, man, that's kind of where you want to be at.
they had rich parents.
Oh, well, that's the thing, right? So,
Yeah.
one of the things that seeing and coaching and developing people throughout my career there, one thing I noticed is that the better your natural market was, the worse you did. And
Mm.
I think that's because you're handed all this stuff on a silver platter, and you don't really ever have to figure out how to break the surface, right? You have no surface tension when you're already in a network, and so as soon as you go through that and you have all this low hanging fruit, then you're out of it. You're like, what do I do now? So I didn't have that, man. Like I grew up in Durham, lived in Wilmington, which is where I met my now wife, and then we moved to Greensboro together, which is where she's from. But I didn't have there was no natural market. I mean, I started going to like the ribbon cutting events and all this and that, and I was the guy that was everywhere, and eventually got into larger corporate settings by doing that, and networked my way all the way up through like the Fresh Market quarter office or headquarters over in Greensboro. And I could just straight up pick up the phone and go through the directory and choose a different phone number on there, and they knew who I was because I was in the building every other day, just going from floor to floor. So that's a lot of it, and it's just breaking through that. So I just carried that forward. I was in the internship, I think, for two semesters, and then went full time after going to UNC Greensboro. I stayed in Greensboro for, I think, right around a full year as full time, and then we're beach people. We wanted to get back down to the beach, so we moved back down to Wilmington. Um, so you beat the odds to start in this industry once in a brand new community, and being gone 3 years from Wilmington, everybody I was friends with in college was gone. I didn't know anybody there really anymore. So we moved back, and I had to start over again. So I started over, rebuilt it again, and then went on to Lives Leaders Summit and did all that, and that's and then did Fast Track and fast forward 7 or 8 years, we started getting a little bit bored, I think. Not really with the finance space, but you have the same exact conversations. I think Northwestern's a phenomenal company. I'll tell anybody and everybody that is where I learned everything I know today, from how to build a financial services practice, how to hire the right staff. I learned so much there. Would never change it. But in that space, they give you a sandbox to play in, and you have to operate within that sandbox. And for a lot of good reasons. They're really good at certain things. If you want to go outside of that, there's a whole big world. Stepping out in the RIA space or owning another small business. It's challenging being under that umbrella, and even having your wife start her own business. There's a lot of compliance if your name has to be on any of it, and they put a lot of scrutiny on that. And over the years, it just got to be a little bit too much. And that was really the main reason why I went on the independent side. It was for a few reasons. Just provide a few extra tools for clients who are, I think, becoming a bit more sophisticated. There's a lot of sophisticated people that are at Northwestern Mutual, and there always will be. But working with a lot of people that have variable income, things that they need, products and solutions that aren't very rigid. They just need things that can be tailored a bit outside of the box. So ultimately, with starting a bunch of businesses, we had juice bars, which we're mostly out of now. We've exited those. We have one more left that's in Durham, North Carolina, that we rebranded from the franchise organization we were with. And then we have a bike shop here in Wilmington, which is, for the most part, it's pretty passive. Cycling is a huge hobby of mine, and triathlon. So we got into that back in 2020, and it just doesn't cause a lot of headache. The people that you hire in a bike shop are extremely passionate about the industry. It's a little different than QSR, quick service restaurants and things like that, where that's very much so a job. It's a job at a bike shop too. Like, don't get me wrong, we're not expecting any of those guys that we have to retire with me, but it's just different. You live and breathe bikes. You don't live and breathe making juice and smoothies, right? So it's just different. But and then along the way in 2019, we got pretty heavy into real estate. My wife's been a developer. She's been a licensed broker since, I don't know, 2008, 2009. And so we just got into renovating some houses, and then got into new construction, and got some really great contractor partnerships, really great lending partners. And you start mixing all that in, that definitely doesn't mix in very well with the captive environment in Northwestern. It certainly can draw some time away from that too. So you have to be careful with that. But we've just built structures around us to keep it all in the mix, where finance is very much so still my pride and joy, and it's my main thing. It's where everything is here. So it's certainly what I see myself doing forever. Especially now at my own RIA, and working to bring on additional advisors and grow the firm and our offerings, and keeping a very clean practice and just doing as well as we can for clients. It's yeah, I mean, that's aside from all the things that happen in between there, that's definitely a really good, I think, start to a timeline of where we were versus where I'm sitting at today. And it's been exciting to see. It's been a lot of growth opportunity, and frankly, I think that's something that gives me an advantage in my firm working with clients, because I can't name another advisor anywhere in the industry. I'm sure there are some that has done as much as we have in the real world, I guess you could say, outside of finance, where you're running up against stuff that your clients are running up against. And I think it's difficult to put yourself in their shoes if you've never experienced owning a restaurant going through COVID. If you've never experienced, really big cash crunches where you don't know how to source money to make payroll, things like that when the environment's not good. And we've experienced all those things. And I think being able to bring that perspective to clients is a huge advantage to our firm for sure.
100%. I think too, what's interesting is a lot of folks at Northwestern, the ones who are, meant to retire there, right? Because it's a wonderful career path. I also feel like those types of folks that retire there are folks that can just follow that system day in and day out, but don't have that additional entrepreneurial itch where they want to have their hands in other things as well. Whereas if you want to do that, you need to get into the independent space. Otherwise, the scrutiny from compliance and hitting, minimums and, things like that sort of get in the way. I guess my first follow-up question to all that before we dive a little bit deeper is, you just listed off advisor, you're bringing on other advisors, flipping houses, new construction. You alluded to it, and we'll talk more about this in detail. A real estate fund, juice bar, bike shop, and I may be missing something, but that's 7 things that I'm counting. You're a husband, you're a father. How do you structure your days? How do you balance all these things? How do you give all these entities the time and attention needed to be successful in each of those various silos?
I think that's a great question. I think the first answer to that is, as we've grown over time, we've made the proper investments in our team. And breaking it down, my wife's role is, 90% of all the effort that goes into the little cafe we've got still is on her. She's creating the menu. She's doing all those things. She's helping source the ingredients. The bike shop it takes such a small amount of time. I mean, it might be 2 to 3 hours a week. And right now that's majority me. But the thing is, our team in there, we have 2 master mechanics that I recruited in from outside of the area. They came from Charlotte and moved down a little over a year ago. We've got a 6-7 year bike shop veteran guy who's been in, who kind of leads the sales floor. Those are my 3 full-time core guys. We've got some high school guys that are really great athletes, and they're kind of peppered in there as well, to fill in, and a college guy that's a really great athlete. And I feel like that they all really respect the business. They respect me, and I respect them. And I don't really breathe down their neck unless I see, some sort of weird trend or some sort of pattern that needs to be addressed. And they've got access to me. I don't hide from them. But I would say first on that, and it doesn't take a ton of time on that side. And even on the construction stuff, my wife does all of the design. She finds a house, and she's the one that goes through, looks at what she thinks it needs to be done, to figure out what she'd want to build, and worries about getting, quotes and all that kind of thing from contractors. My main role in all that stuff is putting the money together. I'll go get the construction loan, which doesn't really take a tremendous amount of time. They want to see a few things. They want to see your scope of work, which is the cost of what it's going to cost to build it. They want to see, your profile, personal financial statement, and your experience, and plans and permitting. That's really about it. I mean, you might have 5 to 7 hours all in, including the closing, to actually get that thing closed up. So it doesn't take a lot of time either. And to layer in on top of that, we have a full-time I mean, she probably works 50, 55 hours a week, even though we tell her it's not what we necessarily want for her. She just is very passionate about our vision, which has almost become her vision too, which is to see these builds through, assist in making sure that things are running smoothly and overseeing the cafe as well with our managers and everything. She's handling underwriting and intake for the private real estate debt fund we've got, which I'm sure we'll talk about. She's running around. She's sourcing supplies for my wife, Dawn. There's so much stuff. She is doing a tremendous amount of stuff. And what that does for me, David, is it allows me to go back and pay a lot of attention on the revenue driving aspects of our life, which is, for me, a big priority is really fine tuning this firm, building it up, and seeing where that takes us. And then also capital raising for the fund and making sure that everything's kept in the context of compliant business. So maybe a little bit of a long-winded answer, but that's the only way that it's possible, is by really, really, really being careful about who you bring in, who's working with you, how trustworthy are you. I mean, our assistant is our power of attorney. She can go to closings for us. I don't have to show up to closings. I don't have to go sign loan documents. So we have a standing power of attorney for certain types of documents. We just try to structure things to where we can really leverage our time and also help other people come up along with us too, that are on our team.
Yeah, that's awesome, Alan. And I would just say, I mean, sounds to me like you've really got everything systematized, right? And try and simplify things and keep it simple. Stupid seems to work, right? And if you've got good people in place to implement that stuff, that's awesome. So when it came to hiring, I'm going to call her your jack of all trades. How did you source her or find her? Because she seems like she's got a crazy dynamic background if she's able to kind of help you guys in all these roles. I mean, were you looking specifically for someone in this type of role, or did she just continued to have more and more capabilities?
The funny thing is, so we had another person that was working with us, who is great, extremely task oriented, not so much, what's the right phase? I don't know that intuitiveness is the right phase, but very task oriented, right? Like we give her task list, boxes get checked. Awesome. What do I do next? And so she decided to go a different direction last June. There's always this divine intervention, or there's the master plan that's already set out for you, right? So we had two local juice bars here in Wilmington that we had sold and offloaded in January of 23. And we had a girl that was managing both the locations locally, and so she moved over with the transition, was still managing the juice bars, and I think she was just ready for something a little different, with a little bit more flexibility. I mean, you're locked to a building, right? I mean, when you're managing a retail front, and that's where she was. And she's got 2 kids, needs to move around a little bit, have some flexibility. So I kid you not, it was 2-3 weeks after we had gotten the notice from our existing assistant, that she sent me a text one morning. I was like getting out of the shower. It was like 6:30 in the morning. Say, hey, if you guys get to the point where you're ready to grow your empire, let me know. And she's like, I'm looking to move on to something different. And I was like, holy cow. And for a backstory there, she was the first employee that we hired at $8 an hour at the juice bar when we had built that one in 18, excuse me. So she'd already been with us for 5 years. And she went from $8 an hour moving up to shift lead, just 10-ish, 10, 11 something, and then moved up to assistant manager, then moved up GM, and then we put her over both the local stores. And then now she's running our entire lives basically. So we had a lot of trust there. She'd never done anything wrong. Even at running the juice spots, she was working far more than she needed to. She always put the businesses first, and we never even knew about it, right? So that was the thing that was the kicker for us. You need to get that person. She's like, hey, I just want to do it. Like, I stayed late tonight, so and so didn't want to cover their shift. We didn't know about this stuff until we would find out about it later. It's like, why'd you work like 9,000 hours last week? She was like, it's what I needed to do. It's what it took. I was like, wow, okay. So it's she was definitely the right person. I think it's somebody that we want to bring up alongside of us. She's just shown that she can do it.
Isn't that the kick-ass thing about entrepreneurship though. I mean, giving somebody the opportunity to flourish. And I mean, I'll guarantee you she didn't grow up thinking she was going to be a barista or whatever you call them at a juice bar, all the way to running the things. And now, essentially kind of being your household chief operations officer, that's,
Huge.
I love stories
Yeah.
like that, man.
I mean, she has her own aspirations of, she's seen us now do, I don't know, 3, 4 different properties and acquire and sell some stuff. And she's like, I really would love to do one day. I don't know when I'd be able to do it, because typically to go get a construction loan, you got to have around 20% of the total project cost in cash to put in. And I said, hey, look, well, why don't we just do this? We'll go and let's find the right house for you. You can look around, bring it to us. Don will help you figure out if it's the right one. And you can do something small. Let's keep it under $300,000, $400,000 total sell price rather. And I'll get on the construction loan with you. You handle 100% of all the materials, and you can ask for feedback where you want it, but you've seen how Dawn does her design and everything. Have at it, and I'll gap fund it for you. And then we'll both be on the construction loan. I'll lend you the money to do all the gap funding so that you effectively can do this entire house with no money out of pocket, not a dollar. We'll gap fund 100% of it because she'll still end up at 70, 75% loan to value. And if it's a, $400,000 house, great. We're going to sell it. And after capital costs, maybe you put 60 grand in your pocket for 4 or 5 months.
Which is probably real money to her, right? Like
Huge.
that's awesome.
Huge.
That's real money to anybody, right?
Absolutely. So that's just the start of it. Then you figure that out. And now we just turn you loose. And I said, but the caveat here is that you can't start doing enough of these to where you feel like you're going to do that and leave us. It has to be, we have to run tandem here.
Well, that's the thing
risk,
too, is it's the risk,
reward.
which honestly, if she were to do that, like I'd imagine you'd be bummed out, but you'd also be proud. But also, I think
absolutely
what will happen is she's seen you guys juggle multiple things. And if she's smart, I think that she's going to want to stay linked up with you because who knows what opportunity comes from it. And to Landon's point, it's cool in entrepreneurship where, a lot of times you initially get into entrepreneurship because you want to be your own boss or you want nice shit or, that's like the initial motivating factor. But then there's this inflection point where you have all the things to a degree that you want that make you happy. And then it becomes providing for someone else and for a lot of other people as you continue to build. And there was times when I was at Northwestern, and I don't even know if she knows this, but I hired my cousin. She obviously knows she was hired, but what I'm about to say, I hired my cousin and we worked together for a few years, but there was multiple times, more than I care to admit, where I couldn't pay myself in a particular month because I needed to pay her first. And it's not just,
we've all been there.
Yeah. And it's not just the pie in the sky sort of dream, like, oh, entrepreneurship is great, like I'm making all this money. It's like, no, there's some crappy times as well where you're sacrificing your lifestyle because you made promises to other people. And I know, Alan, in working with you, particularly, during the COVID time period, because of the clean juice stores and the juice bars, that there were points in time where you were like, damn, things have slowed down a lot and you were in some pickles, so to speak. I guess if you're open to it, I'd love for you to go down that path and be vulnerable and share some of the pinches you've been in and some of the creative ways that you've gone out of it, because I'm sure there's people that are listening that either are currently in that stage or certainly will be in that stage at some point. So getting your perspective on what that was like and creative ways that you got out of it, I think would be super helpful.
Yeah, I think the first is I've got to give credit where credit is due, and I had some partners that wanted to see them succeed, and they were in it thick with me, and so there's definitely contributions on that side. There became a point toward, and we certainly took advantage of the PPP programs and things like that. And frankly, that was during the worst of it. And it always seemed like those would get approved and would hit like
right when you needed it.
God, dude. Yeah. Couldn't even think of the most dramatic way to phrase that. But Yeah, I mean, if it's going to draft at 11:59 p.m., then that was getting deposited 11:58 and 59 seconds, right? I mean, it was like that. And but there did get to a point when we kind of felt like that the writing was on the wall, that they just it was going to be a longer term struggle. And we realized that we needed to figure out better ways to generate income, so that we could, for one, just try to see those through. But we had a big part of our partnerships with the guys that helped us get those up and going was that we took out SBA loans in a couple of them, and our equity contribution was not only the sweat equity, but it was also servicing the debt. So even after selling some of these locations, we're still servicing debt on those. It's not as
And
painful as it
anybody that
once
knows
was.
anything about SBA knows that they will tie every personal asset that
That's
you
right.
have, and they are first in
Yeah.
line on all of those notes.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you just got to suck it up and deal with it. The one good thing about the SBA is, well, for one, I'm very credit sensitive. You can't do a whole lot if you don't have good credit, so you got to figure that out. Um, having a bunch of different businesses and different sources of income, it definitely helps because, frankly, outside of finance, they can all feed one another if they had to, right? Which that helps, even if it's all a wash outside of this. They're all feeding one another. So we worked really, swiftly to figure that out. But there was a point when we decided we're just going to have to figure this out on our own. We can't keep relying on other people to kind of throw money in what seemed like this black hole, right? So, and that's ultimately what it was. It was just like, I mean, it would probably been better spent to just burn it and keep warm in the winter. But we looked at things much bigger than that. We looked at the fact that we employed at one time we had probably 150 employees across all of our stores, and that's a lot of lives to impact if something happened. So that was I would say that was a bigger motivator. And then there's other motivators too, right? Like you're tied into a lease. So there's all these ramifications. And so I think at one point too, you have to sit down and think, all right, is it cheaper for me to pay the lease and pay the debt and not be open? Or is it cheaper for me to break even or maybe lose a little bit more, keep all these people employed during one of the most strenuous times in American history? And that's ultimately the route we decided to go. And it hurt for sure. But again, we try to be very thrifty and very crafty and work really hard and build things up. My wealth management business grew quite a bit during that time. Because I just tried to really focus on the basics again in client acquisition. I was at a fairly comfortable point with the number of clients I had. But I also knew I really liked acquiring clients, but I think everybody goes through this degree of complacency where you get comfortable, and that's why people leave the business. So got back to the growth mindset, really ramped up rather. So yeah, it was not easy. And then you get yourself caught up too, where you get that phone call. If you've owned a retail business, you understand. You get the call and it's like, hey, Alan, we can give you 50 grand today, pay back 12 months. You'll pay back 60. And you're like, oh, well, that's not that bad. And then you forget though, they're going to draft it weekly or monthly or whatever it is, and it's a complete cash flow crimp. So you're not only paying back the 10, but you're also paying back the 50 all in the same year. And so those work. And thankfully, I was intelligent enough to not stack those like I've seen a lot of business owners do. So you go and you get that one, and then that money runs up because you're still cash flow negative, and you go get another one to pay that one and your negative cash flow, and it's just this vicious cycle. So we had some of those, but we never stacked them up, and then those all just got paid back in due time, and then you go through cycles throughout the year. It did get a little bit busier toward the end of 2020, 2021. So we were just about break even operationally, I would say. Maybe still a little bit negative cash flow, but it wasn't to the point where it was choking us anymore. So we kind of made it out of that. But we just got to a point where we said, you know what, we need to focus on what's going to drive the right kind of income. Because a lot of the money we made flipping houses and building houses from 2020 onward went to those things, right? So we didn't really necessarily realize that benefit ourselves. So thankful that all those things fell into place when they did to provide those big liquidity events when you sell a house, whatnot. But it literally just went right back out the door to all these different things. So we kept going because we also really enjoyed it. Now it's flip flop a little bit. Now we're doing some larger projects, things like that. So we're able to live on it a decent bit. But it's I think for anybody that's running a business, if it's not doing well, or you just feel like you're just grinding your gears and you're just not leveling up, so to speak, income wise, I think you really just have to evaluate what other things do I know I could step out and do that would generate more money with better opportunity for upside growth. There's just so much. There's only so much economic potential in a single or a double retail space. I think it's different if you're a Dick's Sporting Goods, something, or some really large chain where it's so big and there's so much revenue coming through that you can live on a 5% net margin, right? And that's still hundreds of millions of dollars. But that's just not, who wants to do that if you have a little cafe or juice bar and you're living on a 10% net on 500 grand? Why not just go in at 9 and be done at 5 every day and work for someone else and not have any responsibility beyond that? Like, why do it to yourself? So it doesn't make sense. We had to really dig deep and figure out, and it's not easy to break away from those things you poured your guts into for years. I would say more particularly on my wife's side. She knew everybody by name, all 100 people that worked for her. She knew everybody by name, everybody by face. That was what she was really into. So it was very difficult to make that decision, but it was the right one. And then now we can just focus, dial in, do what makes money for us, but also makes us the happiest and keeps our stress levels down. And for me, that's wealth management and bike shop and real estate. So I kind of think of it that way. We've narrowed it down to those three things. The cafe in Durham's kind of doing its thing. And we'll see how that pans out over the next year, but we've dramatically cut back the number of different prongs we've got out there so that we can compartmentalize it a bit better, which has been big for us.
Isn't entrepreneurship sexy after hearing that?
Yeah.
So
something even as I was just talking, something I was just thinking about. I think that people also need to remember when they see things on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, that, I think that largely, you can tell me if you have a different opinion. I think largely the entrepreneurs are eternally optimistic, and whether or not they are succeeding or not, they are always going to put an optimistic front because they believe that they're going to get to that point, right? Whether it's in that or something else, they believe they're going to get past that point. So I'm sure you see it. People are like, oh man, Instagram is so fake because this, and this. I know they're not doing that well. Screw off, dude. Like you're not out there doing it, and you're taking this look like they're trying to fake something, but it's you that are not going somewhere because you have the mentality where it's like you just weigh all this negativity down on the front end, and that's keeping you from actually going and doing something. Whereas this person's putting themselves out there, taking all the risk, and still keeping a positive view on things. And I think that gets missed so much, to your point, with it being beautiful and sexy. And it is maybe on the surface level, but people have no idea what happens in the back end that no one else knows about.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think to your point, those of us that are crazy enough to do this journey, I think you have to be the eternal optimist, right? Because there's always going to be shit times. I can remember my early years when I was being flown around the country, at Northwestern, it's like touted as this golden boy for whatever. And it was like, I'm by no means making crazy money hand over fist. I shouldn't be going on this trip or doing this, but you just do it, and you find, like you said, a way just to keep going. But I think a lot of what you said there is also true to entrepreneurship, where people mean a lot to us, right? I mean, you could have just folded up the doors, and yeah, maybe it's a little easier in large corporations, but for what I say, true entrepreneurship, those of us closely held smaller businesses, when we're employing people, those are humans, those are families, those are not just numbers on paper. So, I mean, I commend you. It's a tough decision to make, but taking care of people and trying to, continue to put a little money in their pocket, even when it's taking some money out of yours at that time, it's not an easy decision to make. And so kudos to your wife and you for doing that.
It's an obligation. I feel like
it's what we sign up for,
an obligation,
right?
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know. So there's, throughout my life, from like high school when a buddy and I had a boat detailing and repair business, through now, I've had plenty of ideas that I've never executed on, but I've like talked a big game around. I've had plenty of ideas that I have executed on that didn't work out. I've had plenty of ideas that I have executed on that in fact have worked out. And as I think through your story and your overview, I would argue that you are, how should I say this? For, I guess, for lack of a better way to say it, like a pillar in the community where you can drive around and be like, that's mine, that's mine, that's mine, that's mine, right? And
Yeah.
probably fairly well known because of the fact that you had storefronts, so to speak, and then you get rid of them. And I think a lot of folks, including myself, I have this thought of like, oh shit, I've told everyone these grand old dreams and now I'm pivoting. Are they going to think I'm a failure? And then embarrassment creeps in. And then I realized looking back that like people don't actually care or remember any of that stuff. But I feel like that potential embarrassment prevents a lot of people from starting in the first place. How did you
Yeah.
handle, Alan, going from having all these different storefronts to getting rid of them and just that emotional process of how am I going to explain this to people? Are they going to think I failed, or did you deal with that at all?
No, and I think that there's a couple things that came to mind. One of the things that I battled, and my wife battled the whole time, especially that we had the juice bars, is I did not want any credit for the juice bars at all. Like that was something my wife was super passionate about, still is, frankly, but that was really designed to be her baby. And for every ounce of it's worth, it was hers well more than mine. I dealt with conflict and I dealt with finances. Those were really the two things. I got knee deep when I had issues with the franchisor. I went and faced those battles because her role is better served. Her time is better served making sure that the stores were very stable and we were operating the way that we could. And that was her role, because I would make people cry if I called to correct people who were young and very sensitive in high school and young college kids. And eventually she told me to stop calling to correct things. And I said, all right, but I just, if there's a problem, y'all are certainly the same way. If there's like, hit it head on and let's just deal with it. And people can't take that. So that was her thing. So I say that to say, one of the things we were challenged with is that in the very beginning, especially the first 2-3 years or so of doing those, everyone would always just assume that they were mine, other than people that maybe Dawn had met in person. Just say, oh yeah, Alan. The people would say, oh yeah, Alan knows those stores, but it's really just from association, right? Like they knew who I was, maybe they didn't know Dawn or whatever the case is, and it was just as much annoying to me as it was her, because it was really her effort for all that. I just was working in the back end of things. And I showed up to stuff. If we had something where we were promoting or go to an event, we'd all go as a family. So that's kind of how it was in the beginning. And I did everything I could to, when I'm having conversations, whether it be like this or anything else, I would continuously revert back and use her. Like, this is her. Like, Dawn is doing this. Dawn is doing that. Like, trying to decredit myself, because I didn't like that. And you guys know that I don't know if it's a stigma or just something in society where people just, I think, assume that there's a man behind most businesses unless it's outwardly projected that there isn't. I think that's such a screwed up way just to assume that things roll. I mean, maybe it's the majority, right? So perhaps that's where it comes from. But I think it's okay to ask a question too. If you meet somebody, and unless you know that, there's a guy and he's an attorney and he is himself, then that's pretty obvious, right? But if your family owns a business, then maybe not assume that it's just the husband, right? It's just the guy, because I think women are much more emotionally equipped to deal with the inner workings of a retail place than men are. At least I can say that in my household.
I would agree.
Just my give a damn meter like broke a long time ago, and I would
My
hurt
wife
people's
would tell you
feelings.
that I have no business talking to anybody probably in that same role, much like yours did.
Yeah, so that's the whole thing. So that was a little bit of a challenge. But aside from that, I've never really been that much of a self promoter, really ever, publicly. I love talking to people. I love explaining what I do and things like that, but I'm also extremely invested to understand other people. I think that you get more out of understanding other people than getting people to understand you, just on a one-on-one basis. And I think it builds a lot of rapport and a lot of trust. So I think that's always been my larger focus. So doing things, I never, now, I mean, I do a little bit more, but we're building, $4 million worth of homes and that are beach houses here right now in Wilmington. And I've posted about them 3 or 4 times since we started them in the summertime. It's just not what I've done. And recently I realized that, man, maybe I'm making a mistake doing that, because I was on another podcast here locally a few months ago, or maybe it was earlier this year. But anyway, I started talking about what we're doing here locally, and this private equity fund we put together. It's a 506B public or private offering where we've raised money from investors, and we have autonomy of the money, and we go out for joint ventures, and we go out to lend money, things like that. And I've talked to a ton of people about this, but the thing is that it just reminded me of how much I don't talk about what I do very often, or what we do, also including my wife, because I had people that I haven't talked to in several years send me a text like, "Hey, I've got some cash, man. Let's talk about this thing. This sounds super interesting." And I set up a few meetings the next week, and we raised like $350,000 just from people calling me who had heard the podcast. And they're all people I knew. In the 506B world, you have to have a pre-existing relationship with someone. You can have up to 35 non-accredited investors and unlimited number of accredited investors. So it's a unique structure where people that are financially and fiscally responsible, and they don't have any liquidity risks in the foreseeable future, at least for 1 to 2 years, they can participate in something like this. Whereas you can't in most 506C public offerings where you're being solicited. You have to check all the boxes for being a qualified or accredited investor. So I had people reaching out, and we turned down a couple of people because it just wasn't the right time for them. And then we brought some others on. But again, prime example, I didn't think about it, right? Like, I'm just doing what I do, and I move from person to person. I've just never been one that's out there like, look what I did. It's I don't know. It's turned me off when other people do it. Maybe it's just the way that they do it. So that's something I'm trying to learn and work on for myself, to figure out how to do it tastefully.
I struggle with the same thing. In fact, I mean, I think knowing David like I know him, he and I are both very good connectors, and we do it naturally because we genuinely care. I had a similar example this week of a good buddy of mine, played pickleball with him. He's going through a shitty time, got laid off, and we were playing that morning or whatever, and he's kind of telling me about this. And instantly I was like, okay, well, what'd you do? He's like, I got an IT background. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to introduce him to Chris, another guy who was on his podcast coming up soon, and then I literally got in my truck, and a day later I was like, what I didn't do was offer to help him like personally, right? It was like, I just wanted to fix his problem, try and find him employment as quick as possible. So I literally had to send him a text and was like, hey man, I'm sorry. Like, if you need anything, like rollover stuff, like financial planning wise, like obviously I'm here to help you I'm totally cool. Help you on that too. But it was like, my mind just doesn't even go there. Right. It's just, I've been doing this long enough. I feel like people should know what I do, and hopefully they know I'm open for business, but I struggle with just continuously putting myself out there. Cause I think that comes back from the Northwestern days that I hated that part of it so much. That now I don't even. So I think there is a fine line there where, I probably should tell people, hey, look, yeah, we are taking new clients, but I really don't. So I get that completely.
Well, to your point too, so one thing I've noticed that by not doing that, people become more curious when I do bring something up.
That's
And
valid.
so the reactions that I get on something, for instance, just a few weeks ago, our fund, Seaside Capital Partners, my wife and I own the fund manager 50/50, and we have one fund underneath it. It was designed to be a high yield fund. On the debt side, we lend out at a minimum of 2% monthly. And we've got notes out at 6 to 8% monthly. It depends on risk, collateral, borrower, all of that stuff. But it's just normally small amounts that we're lending out, just spread out very nicely. We're taking collateral. And so there's no one deal that we're really overly invested in. And it works really well. The borrower's not paying a lot of money in dollars relative to their total project. They just need that little $50,000 push to get to the end of the road. And they're fine with paying a couple $1,000 in interest because it made them make 60, right? Who cares? So that's how we were structured and designed. But we also have a joint venture sleeve. It's one of the things I posted online. As I said, man, we're super excited about these houses that we're getting ready to start as a joint venture through CSAT Capital Partners. We're building them in Costa Rica outside of Jaco, about 20, 25 minutes south of Jaco. And here's the renderings, super pumped, going down there next week, which I did to go check them out. Dude, I got a dozen messages and they're like, I'm super interested in this. How do I get involved? And set up several more meetings. And it's looking like we'll pull at least 1, 2, maybe 3 more LPs in over the next couple months from that one post. And so but you mentioning fine lines, like what is the fine line? If I post about that every day, people are going to be desensitized to it, right? Every week, I think people are going to be desensitized. But so when is the right time? And do I just wait until there's enough, meaningful meat to post? So I don't have the answers to that, but I've just been kind of going with the flow. I bet David's got the answers.
Yeah.
So I think where people drop the ball, in my opinion, on social media, where people get bad taste in their mouths, it's when it's the look at me and how cool I am sort of vibe without any
Correct. Yeah.
vulnerability or context or anything along those lines. So I think that if you were going to start posting more, it needs to be not or less so look at this property and more so here's how all this is happening, right? And kind of give bite-sized chunks
Right.
as to here's how I even came across this partner for this joint venture. Here's how we pulled together the money for it. Here's what the projections are. Here's, why I went down there to check it out in person and what I saw. So it's more of like the behind the scenes kind of how to, not just look at how cool I am type of vibe. But I think, I don't know, in my opinion, I think that for folks who are doing cool shit, in my opinion, I think you have an obligation to share how you're doing that with other people, because there's probably someone in your life from way back when that had that impact on you that got you to start doing what you're doing now. And you could be that person for someone who's a few chapters behind you. And I mean, that Costa Rica post is what got me interested, where I was like, hey, what's the deal? And then I sent you over some money, right, to put in the fund. So I think just that simple exposure, how you're doing it, what the benefits are, and kind of talking about it, not just, hey, look at this. I think is a better vibe to put out on social. But let's spend some time and talk about that. So like, how'd you find the partner that you're partnering up with in the Costa Rica deal? And just go a little bit deeper into the fund. Like, who does it make sense for? What are the minimums? What's the sort of expected, obviously disclaimer with compliance, but like expected rate of return based on how you're lending out, how you're structuring these joint ventures. Like, let's do a deep dive on the fund in case folks are interested.
Yeah. And you mentioned how you got connected with particular LPs or other partners and this and that. You have no idea when you meet someone, you have no idea when they're going to pop back up in your life again. This is the strangest thing. Like, I've gotten connected with people on Instagram and on LinkedIn or wherever else, and maybe chit chatted, maybe had a coffee, and then all of a sudden they pop back up because you guys met on the same bridge in between 2 projects or ideas, whatever it is. It's the strangest thing. So I think the first thing is I encourage everybody to not shortchange themselves by not going and taking that meeting or making that phone call or just trying to make a connection.
Well, on that note, I mean, look at the 3 of us. I saw Landon up on the stage when I was an intern and he was accepting an award. Friggin', what's that? 14 years ago. Alan, we first met at Fast Track in probably 2013, 2014, 10 years ago. Now we're all on the podcast together. We've exchanged dollars, both in you hiring me and me hiring you. You're working with my wife right now on some design work for your wealth management business. And like, these are all 10, 15-year relationships just on this call. So just to prove your point, in a hyper relevant way. Like the three of us are a
Yeah.
product of that.
No, it's huge. The most everybody that came in from the and this will relate back to that too. So most everybody that's in the fund right now, I've known for quite a long time. Some of them looser than others. But when we first launched this thing, I really had no idea, for one, how quick it would grow. I just didn't know, right? Like we had this idea. It was birthed because we had some issues with prior lenders in the past, right? And so we wanted to control where our capital came from. We had lenders that had committed to provide capital to fill gaps, and we took on a really large build, and they failed to follow through, and it put us in a really bad spot. And when I say bad spot, it took me about 3 weeks to figure it out. I raised the capital in other places, but it was more expensive because it was yesterday money, right? And it was not ideal. So I said, okay, well, how can we control this? So we had, here locally, I've got a Rolodex of, hypothetically speaking, or,
You're not actually
no
flipping through.
Rolodex around. That's right. 12, 14 people that at any given time we could call, and they have seen us do, whether it was they worked with us indirectly or directly beforehand, either way. They've seen what we've done in the last 3 or 4 years. We've seen we followed through. We've completed a number of projects. They like them. I could call them up at any given time and say, hey, I got this project. I need a 50K bridge for a month and a half. You in? They're like, no problem. And they'll say, just send me a note when you get a chance. It's like that kind of relationship at this point with most of them. And then, yeah, like a week later, I'll finish writing up the note and get it signed and sent over to them. It's all good. Because for one thing, in Wilmington, it's a little smaller environment, a lot of people, but that world of people is pretty small, and so you can't run from them anyway. So you'd be out of town in like a week if you screwed everybody over. But nonetheless, it's that kind of thing. I mean, so some of the LPs, my very first investor that came in was from an Instagram post. Actually, I put it on my story. I said, "Hey, we've got this thing." And it was something super brief, and I think it was actually when I had first gotten connected around the Costa Rica thing. And I said, "We're super excited about this project. Let me know if you have any interest." And didn't really get any responses. But I started going through all the people that I followed on Instagram, and I just sent a few messages out. And I sent one to a guy that I've known for probably 6, 7 years. And we've had some conversations, a few meetings, nothing super, super in depth. I said, hey man, I think that I've got something that you may really like. He was like, send it to me. I said, all right. So I emailed it to him, sent me his email, and he calls me like 45 seconds later. He was like, how do I get in on this? And because I'd sent him all the info specifically on the Costa Rica thing. That was like the first joint venture thing that came to us in the fund. And that came to us through a wholesaler who we've acquired and sold a couple of properties through. And that guy's out of Miami. So it's just the weird way of how things work. That wholesaler is directly tied to this lady who's a realtor in Miami. And then that realtor in Miami is directly tied to this guy who's doing the Costa Rica stuff because he was her mentor. And he's in just outside of Orlando. So everybody kind of gets hooked up. I called the guy. We had a couple calls. My wife and I jumped on with him and his partner, and seemed really cool. And we were like, all right, well, we should do more due diligence. So then I started digging further, and then I found out that like that guy has a loose connection to a family member I've got in Florida who knows who he is and doesn't really know him, but he knows enough. He's been in Florida practically his whole life, and he could kind of look back in his circle and be like, all right, well, there's never really been any flags that have been thrown up on this guy. He's done a lot of developments, blah, blah, blah. So in August, I jump on a plane with Sterling, my son. I said, it's like Thursday or something. I said, Sterling, you want to fly to Florida with me tomorrow for a couple of days? He was like, what? I was like, yeah. So we jumped on a red eye together and headed down there. Well, that was later in the day, actually. It was right on the way back, but met the guy for dinner. We went to a Brazilian steakhouse, met the guy straight off the plane, and spent like 3.5 hours there, just breaking bread and trying to get to know him and things like that. And we went back, still did more due diligence and checked more things out, and it was all really legit. So we committed to doing it. And we've met a ton of other people through him now too. So, and I finally went down to Costa Rica a couple weeks ago because we're really getting to the point where we're breaking ground, expecting permits in the next day or two. And so I wanted to go see everything. And I did, and had a great experience, met all the other people that have partnered with him as well to build a house that they're either going to keep or that they're going to turn and sell. And this guy basically just had owned these 10 acres for 20 years and has been sitting on. He's done other stuff down in that area, and that's where he wants to retire. And so his idea was, you know what, let's build the neighborhood out. We can
Mm.
to some degree, we can control what types of houses are built if we're involved in all of them, right? So he's by design putting this neighborhood together that he wants to live in, and it's a pretty neat concept. Beautiful, beautiful area. People are very nice, and so that's what he's doing. So he's coming in and he's bringing people in to split the construction costs and then ultimately split the profit. So that deal, if it works out how it's been penciled, and the other ones have been very close to it, is you'll have about $90,000 or $100,000 that'll go into 3 individual houses each, and we'll get about $90,000 or $100,000 back in return. So, and that right now represents about a 25 to 30% holding in the fund, roughly. Yeah, probably closer to 25%. As we grow, it'll end up being less ultimately. But if we have one pocket of the fund that's generating close to an 80 to 100% rate of return, and then we've got half the fund that's in debt that's generating, on average, I think our loan rate right now is like 2.7% average monthly right now. So it's nearly 33% gross a year, and then we have other joint ventures that are in process now that are still all within that 50 to 80% cash on cash range, depending on the project. Because all we're doing is we're going out and we're still leveraging construction loans. So the way that we're doing it is the fund is going to go out. If we buy a lot to build on, the fund is going to go secure a construction loan. I'm going to have to sign on it personally. So my skin's in the game too. So that's one thing I tell our LPs is like, I'm on the hook for this. If all else fails, I got to pay back this money. So it's very much so on me, even outside of the fund, which I hope our LPs appreciate. And, if we go buy a lot, we got to put 20% of the total project cost in from the fund. And then we typically try to build where we can have a 20 to 30% net profit, at least. We target 30 or more. Then now we're looking at nearly 100% plus cash on cash rate of return if everything works exactly how we expect it to. And we can turn that in 6 to 7 months, groundbreaking all the way to selling the property. So if I can recycle that same money twice a year, then I'm effectively generating a 160% to 200% rate of return on that pocket of money inside of the fund. And our goal is to have 1/3 to 1/2 of the fund working in joint venture pretty much at all times. So we have lofty goals, and we can do that. I think fluidly right now because we are small. I don't know what that looks like if we're at 10 million or 15 million, because I'm not there yet. And if it gets to that point, we need to dissolve part of the fund or start over and have it smaller or split it into 2 funds. We'll do that when we get there, because I think that the structure is unique. I think people like that it's not unsecured business lending, where it's a little bit shaky. I mean, we're taking collateral, we have ownership in all these things. And I tell people, is there capital loss potential? 100%. But if I have
Always
20
is.
LPs in this fund, oh yeah. But if I have 20 LPs in this fund and between joint venture and debt, if our average position, let's just say it was $100,000 and we've got 4 million in the fund. I mean, what's the math on that? Like, 5% or something like that. Then man, we took a 5% capital hit. But guess what? The very next month, we're getting interest deposits of 2.7% on $2 million at that point. So we're gonna have 40 grand go in. So in 2 months, we've effectively made up that principal loss. So we're trying to do what we can to insulate when those things happen. And for all transparency, in the real estate world, in the lending world, it is not a question of if, right? It's a question of when. There's going to be a project that doesn't go right. There is going to be a borrower that gets hung up, and there's going to be a problem at some point. And I think that as a fiduciary, not only in my RIA, but also for the capital that we manage through the fund, it's our responsibility just to do the best we can to mitigate the losses and to mitigate the risk, I should say. And we do that just by spreading out and not overexposing. So, that's really the way that it works.
What's your hold time? I mean, I'm assuming in anything in real estate, typically you're going to have a lockup period on dollars in there. Do you guys, what does that look like? 12 months?
Yeah.
That's not bad.
12-month lockup. And we've developed this investor disclosure that we recently started pushing out as we started to grow beyond relationships that were really close to me already. People I still know, but people that they're just not as close. Maybe like in 4 months from now, you're like, hey, I'm in. I don't know you as well as I know David. David's like, I know Alan. I don't even really care about the fund documents, but you wouldn't be that way. And so we've got this investor disclosure that points all this stuff out. Like the very first bullet point is liquidity risk. And it's like, I understand that I'm sending my money in here and it's going to be in here for a minimum of 12 months. And even on the first day after 12 months, if I want this money back out, it's still dependent on when liquidity comes back to the fund. Right. So it could be 6 more months beyond your request before you get that money back. And that's so freaking crucial for people to understand, because it's crucial for me to do my due diligence on that side. So 12 months is contractually how long it's in there. But to tell you the truth, like, I really like putting IRA money in there better than non-qualified money. Because if somebody's 40 years old and they've got some money in there, great. Like, throw $250,000 in there, and then you can't pull it out anyway. It's like, let it roll. Market's pretty frothy right now. Like, why not have it? Why not have something that's non-correlated and put it over here and let it grow for a bit? And God forbid, at some point, we all know it's cyclical. The market is going to take a turn backward. To what degree? Nobody knows. Even if they think they do, they don't. And that portion is not going to be subjected to that loss temporarily. And we can continue turning that money. And back to my example a minute ago, if the fund lost 100 grand on a deal, but you have an equal percentage in 40 different deals across the fund, your individual hit is like nothing, right? It's like 10 grand out of your 100. And, we've all seen how fast the market can drop down 10% with no recourse, right? I mean, we've got recourse on this stuff. To how long that takes, and it's up to, the legal process, but we have recourse. So, I mean, we've really tried to think of all things that we can to protect people's money. And that was the biggest thing for us.
Well, even
But
from my understanding, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the debt that you're lending out for folks that are doing their own real estate deals, their properties, become collateral. And because you guys have experience in flipping and fixing up and doing your own real estate deals, absolute worst case scenario, you just take over the property, you finish it, and then you sell it. So it's less so the potential for loss per se if you're able to get in there, and more so just extending the time frame of the return.
Yeah. And having been on both sides of the table, being the lender and the borrower, if something's going to get delayed, it will get delayed. So when we're going through the underwriting process and some of these, I only need this for 90 days. I'm like, you sure about that? It's one of those conversations. And so we'll push it out and say, let's just why don't we do 60 days or 90 days, and then we'll do 2 30-day extensions. We'll hit you with a 1% extension fee each time, but I'm not going to throw you into default and push your rate up to 8% a month, or something, egregious. And as long as there's a lot of communication and I feel comfortable at where the process is, I'm not going to go beat down your door. Like, send me some pictures every 2 weeks. Like, throw me some pictures. You're moving through the process. Things are delayed, whatever, right? Like, I get it. Our goal is to generate a yield on the capital that's out there. Like, we want it paid back. But if you're making forward progress and that money that we lent you didn't go send you down to the Bahamas for 3 weeks or something, then I'm cool with it. I just need to know what's going on. When you get really big, you don't have that flexibility, I think, with individual borrowers. So that's something that we really want to be just as much of a team member as we do, a lending partner or a JV partner. To keep it clean.
What's that look like long term, Alan? I mean, because eventually you are going to get to that size. I mean, if this thing goes well, right? I mean, that's the goal. Does your time and attention kind of have to get focused more and more there, or do you just kind of start hiring and
bring people in
a team?
Yeah, I think I would start hiring and building out a team. We're getting ready to implement some software. We probably should have implemented it back in the fall, because now we've been using spreadsheets to track all of our loans, which is fine, but we're doing more and more and more loans. And it's just difficult to really keep track of them as good as we need to. So we're implementing software now that we're going to be able to grow into, which will be really helpful, and it automates a lot of the process for underwriting and all these things. So now there'll be an embedded link on our webpage when you go and apply. It spits all the data in here, and I'm automatically going to notify when that comes through. Right now, when something comes in, we've got Michelle, who's our assistant. I've even taught her this, David. It's like, I mean, she knows how to go through and calculate just initially based on their ask. Assuming they've uploaded everything, she can look at a PFS and say, hey, like, do you own no real estate, or did you just neglect to list it on your personal financial statement? Add that in there. Like, really, you have no credit card debt and you're working in real estate. you know, because everybody carries credit card debt during a project, and you pay it off when it gets paid, or you get a draw, whatever. So she knows these things to look for, and then she can go in and say, hey, what's the ask? What's your first lien position debt amount? And then what are you asking from us? And she'll go through and calculate it and say, hey, look, this deal looks really clean. Like, you got a 780 credit score. You're a great borrower, but you're wanting us to put you at 82% loan to value, and we can't do that. And so she'll go through and then go back to them and say, hey, we, instead of lending you 80,000, we can lend you 54,500, and that's going to put you under our threshold of 75% loan to value, including your first lien debt. And, you know, we also want to make sure you've got money to pay the interest too. You have enough income coming in, because now you've got debt on the first position and our position, which we will do Dutch interest in some cases. If the deal's super strong, the borrower's really good, they have no delinquencies, never had a discrepancy in their credit report, I've got no problem, you know, deferring interest. We generally don't even capitalize the deferred interest. So, you know, and that can be tough for a smaller fund because we don't have the income each month, but, you know, it just makes sense. We can help somebody get through the deal. We're still going to make good money. Our rates aren't cheap, whatever. So we're super flexible in our structure. But yeah, in terms of how it looks when we get real bigger, I think, yeah, we'll probably have to bring someone on who's only doing the underwriting, and we're probably just gonna have to get more rigid, you know, on the requirements. It's going to be a bit more boilerplate, I would imagine. The 75% LTV is already boilerplate. That's just a hard cutoff for us, because we know that if you go liquidate a property from ARV down, you know, if you have to take a haircut, it's, you know, in this market, you'll be able to do it for selling it for 20% less, or even 25%, and at least get our capital out. You know, without having to go and cause a bunch of foreclosure mess and all this other stuff for someone. You probably will bring on some external loan officers as well, maybe one additional loan officer to handle that stuff start to finish, and who can do admin. So, and the fund would support it at that time too, because there'd be enough in there. In our fund docs, we can already run those expenses through the fund. None of our expenses for Michelle run through the fund at all currently. But if we ran, she just does too much of it. It's just too mixed in. But if we hire somebody directly, then there'd be no issue with that. You know, we'd be able to do that.
Makes sense.
And the fund wouldn't even feel it. So yeah, that's I think that's how it would ultimately have to go. I think you get to a certain point too, where, you know, if we grew to, I mean, we've gone from 0 to 2 million in you know, like 5 months. So I mean, and I think it just exponentially gets bigger too, especially as we have projects return, put more capital out. It's just going to grow quicker and quicker. So I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if we're at 5 or 7 million at the end of this year. And I think that'd be a pretty realistic goal for us, and we'd be able to do a lot. But at that point too, it becomes, we need to be a lot more stringent on things, and just have more rigid structure. You know, like I can't spend 9 hours on one individual borrower over the course of a week and a half trying to figure it out. So we'll see. Maybe even have to implement a loan minimum too, because, you know, you run into this thing where, is it worth to send 30 grand out for 90 days, right? At 2% interest? Like, it's just not. The administrative is just not worth it. I didn't feel like that in the very beginning when we had a $500,000 in there, but now it's just kind of annoying. And so we've already talked about changing our structure for that. Under 50,000, there's just a flat fee, whether you pay it back in a week or whether it be 2 weeks. On 50 grand, maybe we're going to charge you 57,500 on payback, and I don't have to think about it anymore. And we're probably going to start on those deals too. I'm going to take it as earned in the very first day, and then we're going to net you out 42,500 on your wire, right? You still pay us back 50. So we're trying to think about those structures to where it makes sense for us to service the smaller stuff like that too.
And there's two sides of marketing that fund, right? It's marketing folks who are investing in the fund, and marketing it out to folks who need that capital. Have you just been leveraging relationships up through this point, or how have you been attracting folks from either side?
Yeah, you know, I think by loan volume, we have our largest borrower is here in Wilmington. I say largest by the number of projects. We still abide by all of our rules about our exposure per particular deal, all those kinds of things. So just remember that when I'm talking about this. But in terms of dollar amount volume, and number of loan volume is out to one builder group here in town, actually locally. And it's tangible, right? It's like right here. I know their deals. We know the market. My wife can very easily look at it and say, no, this deal is kind of bunked. You know, this is not one we want to do. and we don't do every deal that comes across us, but we've done a ton for them, and we always get paid back. And there's never any argument. Obviously, because we're managing people's money, we will never be at that point through the fund where like, hey, here's the wire, send me the note next week. Like we still have all the boxes we have to check, but we move quick because these guys follow through big time. So I like that. I already have their profiles. So there's no more collecting data. There's no more. We get an updated PFS from them maybe every 6 months. But aside from that, I always have an idea of what their PFS looks like anyway, because I can see all their deals they've got. And we're attaching to individual properties. It's just easy. Aside from that, we've got 1 or 2 brokers that bring us deals all the time. Some of them are DSCR lenders, debt service coverage ratio lenders for rental properties. Maybe they need to take down a property in cash, and they need a little bit more time, say maybe 45 days to stabilize the property and then go ahead and get in their process to refi, or maybe it's 6 months because they have to stabilize it and wait for a seasoning period. I don't know, but we'll do some of those too. So we get a lot of referrals from that. So aside from that, we get random leads from people find us on Facebook. I mean, our incoming lead, amount right now is a pretty comfortable amount. I think anything more would be I'm just not responding to people quick enough. So I would tell you that I would rather keep a smaller number of borrowers that are using us all the time than have this huge database with hundreds and hundreds of borrowers with loans all over the place.
It's probably the same for their end too, right, Alan? I mean, I've got to think I just know the cost of doing business is if it's easier, I'll pay a little more for it, right? Like, let me just get this damn thing done off my plate. And if I don't have to go deal with a bank and sign my damn life away and go through closing meetings, it's just, I can get it done. I know you, we've done a ton of deals together. I'm going to pay $1,000 more on this deal, but it saves time and heartache. Worth it all day, right?
Yeah. So check this out. So on that note, I didn't even think about this. This same group, we got to a point where we just couldn't add more to what they were doing because we just didn't have the funds. And I'm still not going to go like 60% deep in the fund capital base just with one borrower group, regardless of what they're doing. So, we were kind of capped out. And I said, well, let me go look around. So just oddly enough, again, we're talking about connections here. I had a call with a broker and this other guy, and this other guy was interested in setting up their own fund. And the more they looked into it, they're like, yeah, that's cool, but we don't want to have to deal with end borrowers. So they decided their business model was going to be, they were going to lend to funds. And so I got back on the horn with them earlier this month, actually. Nope, it's January. It's beginning of January. And they said, yeah, look, we'll test a few things out. So we had a $50,000 loan come up to the fund. It was super clean. And I said, all right, let's do this. So they lent money to us. They're also trying to get a high yield, mind you. So I'm only using them on deals where I can get a good spread. So what I try to do is I try to tie in notes that are coming back on a particular date, and then I base that on what we borrow out. So I'm just essentially leveraging a note that's out, very small amounts, like 50 grand for this one. We're actually getting repaid. The closing's happening this coming Tuesday, actually. Borrowed 50 grand. We've done that twice, actually. We have one pending and the one's already been paid back. We sent the 50 grand out. I'm charging the guy 3.5% a month. They're charging me 2%. And so I'm making a 1.5% spread without the capital leaving the fund, which is pretty cool. So to me, it's 18% yield with no capital exposure. So it's no different than leveraging anything else, except I'm not buying the securities. And I've got, for the most part, I've got all the control over it. So, and then we've got another one out now, and I tied it to this $50,000 note that's coming back next week. So, and I've got the loan out for 4 months. We've only $50,000 out weeks now, and he's a great borrower. He's come to me before, but the property is a little bit rural. He understands the area. It's like, okay, we'll take a flyer on it. He's got an 805 credit score, got the capital to repay it if something goes bad. Cool. So we did it. Issued him 50 grand. So basically it's getting split, the interest effectively. And as soon as I pay it off, then now I was able to book the loan, and now I'm going to collect the entire interest rate for the remainder of the duration of the loan. I'll lead into that because they saw how much activity we were doing with this builder group locally. And they said, what do they really need to grow? I said, man, these guys are doing like 75 houses this year on their own, outside of doing investor houses for people like us. And so he flew down here from across the country and spent a couple of days with me, went around, checked our properties out, wanted to get super involved in what we're doing personally, which is really cool. And then he's done a couple loans indirectly also for this builder group. And he's like, you know what, let's set this up. He's like, we'd rather have a smaller group that we lend to as well, something tangible that we can see with collateral. We can attach to their 8 or 10 rental homes basically to guarantee the line, so we don't have to worry about taking title on every single property, because it just slows down the closing process. And so he flew out here again, and I took him to go meet them. And so, you know, they issued them $1.5 million line of credit through me, and our fund is the facilitator. But all of our documents is that I have zero recourse risk to the funds, but we're taking a 0.5 point spread every time we issue a loan. So, you know, their rate that they're paying is 2.5 monthly, and the rate that I'm paying is 2. So, and then I charge origination fees for them because of their volume. I'm just doing 1%. So every time I issue a loan, the manager company, Seaside Capital Partners, which is my compensation, is 1%. So, you know, if we're turning, their average duration of their loans is like 40 days, by the way. So if I'm turning $1.5 million every 40 days, then, you know, that's 15 grand every 40 days just from origination fees. And which is phenomenal. And then the fund is doing a 0.5 point. The origination fees is what helps go pay for Michelle and things like that, because she's getting comped a little extra when she helps push these loans through and collect all the documents and do all that stuff. It is not an expense of the fund, her or the origination fees. The fund itself does not charge origination fees. The fund manager company, the facilitator, we charge the origination fee. So it's we have all the incentive in the world to write short-term money, short duration notes, both for the fund and for the fund manager. And I like that because I like shorter duration projects because we're closer to the end. There's less time frame for things to completely go wrong. If there was something to go wrong, it's probably already happened during the longer stint of their project. So there's a lot of reasons for doing it other than just origination fees. But I like the money coming in, coming out. We can go ahead and line up our next loan we're going to fund, because I know we've got all these durations coming in this month. So that's really the way that we've structured it. And these guys are also helping to do some neat things where we're still not having to take the risk. But I'll give you a really good example. We are right now, next week, working on closing this. Still, we're going to float escrow. So this guy's got essentially, he has a massive seller credit coming back for north of $1 million for this multifamily building he's buying. But his lender is making him have 900 grand in escrow. He doesn't have 900 grand. He's got a couple 100,000. And it's all papered up. Money never leaves escrow. We did a dual escrow authorization release with the closing attorney, so that money is literally not leaving unless both of us sign off on it. And then when it does, it's coming back to us. So we're charging the guy 3% for 1 day on $900,000. We're going to wire it in at 9 o'clock in the morning. We're going to have it back by 5 in the afternoon, and we're essentially getting paid back from the seller credit once the loan funds. So it's a win-win for everybody. 27 grand. The guys that are putting the money up are getting 60%. The fund is going to keep 40% for 1 day. So those are the kind.
Next time you find that deal, call me.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, we'll split it up.
Yeah.
But, it's a great deal. So, I mean, we've done similar things for wholesalers where, you know, somebody's signing a contract, or, you know, now how much you guys know about the wholesaling world, assignment of contracts are really cool until you get to the closing table, right? And then the seller of the property sees how much the wholesaler is making in the middle of it between the end buyer. So a lot of them now want to do double closings. So it closes that chapter, and then it's a whole new closing right after it, but they still got to have the money to float the closing. So, you know, we'll send the 200 grand in for the day and charge them 2%. And then we get the money back at the end of the day, and that money's never used. It never leaves escrow, but they have to complete the purchase on their end. They cannot float an end buyer with the seller and skip the middle party. So I mean, when I say we're doing everything we can to make really good risk decisions and generate really, really strong alpha for our investors, I mean, those are some of just the one-off examples that we're doing. Those don't come to my table every single week, but yeah, I love when they do though. They're great.
Yeah.
What I think is really cool. So we had a 2-part series with a guy named Terry Shanahan, and he had a really cool story, but just to summarize it briefly, at the beginning of COVID, he had about 100 grand in cash. $200,000 in a line of credit, and I believe the line of credit was essentially a loan from his Northwestern policy, because he was at Northwestern for a couple of years as well. And he took that 300 grand in total, deployed the Burr method of acquiring real estate, and he scooped up 185 ish single family homes worth about 30 million in 32 months.
That's wild.
It's wild. And in the first part, it's an inspirational story. In the second part, it's more tactical and what he did to build
Yeah.
out his systems and processes. And there are some people like myself, I hear that and I'm like, well, that's really cool. And I would love to do that, but I would also not love to do that, right? To coordinate all those moving parts. But I still have interest in real estate, which is why when we were speaking, something like this is interesting to me because I still get the exposure to that asset class. But frankly, I don't have to deal with the shit that comes along with, he's sharing,
Yeah.
the eviction process and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
where, if you have two properties and you're dealing with one or two evictions, like that can debilitate you. But when you're, spread out over 185 homes, it's just part of the
Right.
deal. Whereas
Yeah.
someone like myself, it's like, I don't want to deal with that, but I still want exposure. So it's just cool to see that there's so many different ways to skin a cat. And you
Yeah.
don't have to go in it on your own. You can latch on to someone like yourself and help empower you with cash to go out and do what you do best. And still focus on what's generating that cash in the first place on my end specifically. So it's just interesting to see how many different ways you can skin a cat.
A lot of ways to make money in this world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the reasons I love
Yeah.
this podcast is listening to everyone's, and obviously I'm biased in terms of loving the podcast, but you're able to get exposure to how so many different people generate revenue and wealth so many different ways. It's like, no shit, like that's a really good idea. So that's all I wanted to say is
Yeah.
it's cool to see that.
You're right.
So, Alan, I got a question. I feel like we just kind of breezed over your wife's role at all this, but has she always been entrepreneurial? I mean, it sounds
Yeah.
like she's in this shit every day with you, like, which
Oh
would
man,
be
she's in the
cool.
thick of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. She I can't tell you the amount of time it takes for her to really put together everything that has to go with building a house. There's so much that I don't think about on my end. I'm like, hey, let's get the boys over here. Let's get the sticks up. Let's get this thing rolling. She's like, wait a minute. We don't have tile picked out for 4 bathrooms. We don't have the wall tile picked out for 4 bathrooms. We don't have the backsplash picked out for the kitchen. We don't have the toilets. We don't have the bath. It gives me a headache thinking about it. So she keeps this spreadsheet of all the stuff she's got to go find and source. And then what happens, right? You go and you find it. Oh, this one's on back order. So now I have to find the equivalent. Also, is this the best price? Can I find this for $1.50 a foot instead of $2.50 a foot? And so Michelle now, thankfully, comes into a lot of that on the pricing thing, but she's having to figure out the design on the front end of it. So I think that the work that she puts forth is really showing up on the back end when it all comes together.
That's the value
she's the
piece,
one that's
right?
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, that's the thing that sells it. I mean, so here's a really good example. We have a duplex that we're selling or we're building currently. We will be selling it in Curie Beach, North Carolina. Right. So I don't know exactly what it's going to list for yet. It's not going to be cheap. It's great location. It'll be market value. But the difference is that what she does when she looks at the at market value and what she thinks we can list it for is let's go out and figure out for every other property out here, let's just say that's $1 million. What does it look like inside? And where I think builders and designers and people that are flipping homes and all this and that really missed the mark over the last few years, and it's going to catch up to them, is they tried to do less and get more. So they were doing a little bit above builder grade for $1 million or $2 million house near the beach. There's no custom aspect to it. There's not a lot of taste. It's just white walls and subway tile, right? It's just not great. So my wife comes in, she sees all that stuff, and she's like, "Hey, well, let's look at stuff that's in our price point." So she's like, "If we're going to list this for $1.5 million or whatever the number is, let's see everything else that's listed right now at $1.5 million. Oh, it all looks like it came from Walmart. Great. So now, knowing what we need our numbers to be, she's going to go out and make this thing look like it fed all the freaking catalog. And that's what she's done with every single house. So now when it gets listed and there's 7 houses and they're all listed for 1.5 million, and for all intents and purposes, they're equal aside from the finishes and just how well it's put together. Whose is going to sell first, right? We cut the competition by making it better, not by making it cheaper. And that is what she is so good at doing. And that is that you were talking about being in the forefront of things. I think that's one reason, even with a lot of the real estate stuff. I mean, everybody knows that she's doing the design thing, but as it's going up, I'm the one that is kind of on the forefront because I'm the one that's handling the money. I'm moving the money around. I'm doing this, doing that. I'm sending wires and worrying about interest payments and all these things. I'm the one that's on the forefront dealing with most of that stuff. She's in the backdrop ordering all these things, shuffling it around town to get it to where it needs to go, coordinating with builders to come pick it up from our house if it came to us. Like, it's just kind of all over. But the finished product, I disappear and she is right out front. And that's what she loves to do. And I joke with her. I'm like, without you, I could build a house, right? And like get it together and I'd get it done and get it to the market. But if you built the same one for the same amount of money, mine's not going to sell next to yours, like anything close. So there's immense value with what she brings to it. And it's because that is her passion. The design
That's
aspect
awesome.
is not my passion. I appreciate it very much. Love looking at it. Same thing like art. Like art's not my passion. I can look at it like, that looks pretty cool. But that's her deal. She knows what's going to get it to the market. It's going to be at the top of people's list. So it's awesome.
I got a feeling a lot of our listeners are going, holy shit, I've tried to build my own house with my spouse before and it about ended a divorce. The fact that you guys do this shit all the time is probably mind blowing to many people.
We haven't built our own together yet, but even with that, we've been talking about rebuilding our house now for 2 years, and we just have this ongoing list. And I think it was good for us to do it not on a whim, because we've nixed things, we've added things. My son pops up and he's like, "I want an art room that's 9,000 square feet." I'm like, "Yeah, I don't know about that." So
Yeah.
there's just all these things that come
You
along.
better
with
be
it, and when
freaking
we're ready to do it-
Picasso.
No joke. So I have very few things. I want a small little office area, and then I want a lounge that has really good ventilation that I can have cigars and some bourbon, and have a really cool setup. Those are the 2 things I want, and that are probably more specific to me. Everything else can be built around. Like I don't have a ton of. I just know she's not going to build something that's not going to be functional and beautiful. So to me, it's just not a concern. And I think that guys, you just got to find your role and know where your place is. And if you know that your wife's got some taste, just let her run with it. And there's always going to be a budget.
Support
Like
it.
stick to your budget. So it's just you got to have that more than anything. And then we have a budget. My wife stays within it, believe it or not. Sometimes I'm like, "Hey, it's a little pricey." She's like, "Well, don't worry. I signed up for a trade account and I'm gonna save 25%. I'm like, "Cool." So
Well, I love you.
yeah, exactly. She's aligned with me on budget and I'm aligned with her on whatever she wants to do with the design. I just don't question it.
I mean, that's the best takeaway from the whole podcast. Just shut up and run with it when the wife tells you what to do, right?
No,
All of
that's
our
right,
lives would
man.
be a hell of a lot simpler if we just followed that motto.
Yeah, but the thing is that she has that touch pretty much on everything. I mean, I send her. She's busy with a lot of that stuff right now. So like when a deal comes through for me to look at, I asked her about one the other night because I was really unsure about days on market and possible ARVs. What a house could sell for this particular guy. We ended up turning the loan down because it was a little bit out there in Western North Carolina, and it's one of those things where it could probably be okay. But we looked at the market trends, and she looked at all the CMA, the comparative market analysis, all these things, and was like, "Yeah, maybe it's okay, but we'd have to price it so high to offset any potential challenges. It just wouldn't make sense. We'd just rather not do it. Let's move on to one that's cleaner that we can, maybe split that up into 2 deals where we're making similar yields." So, and that was her foot in the sand. Her
God,
line
if
in
I
the
talk
sand.
to my wife about yields, that would be an interesting conversation, and her eyes would glaze over real quick. God love her, but
I think
that would not be her
when I
jam.
get deep in it, yeah, when I get deep in
Yeah.
it, she's like that. I think she just looks at it from the objective. She's like, "What is your objective?" And I was like, "Achieve good yield." "What is not your objective?" "To lose money." And she's like, "Okay, well then maybe we should skip this one and get one that's going to achieve both of those more securely."
Yep.
There you go. Well,
It's
one
a
of
ton of fun.
yeah, and like balancing, working together, living together, being married together, parenting together, it must be an interesting dynamic that you have to be fairly intentional about somewhat putting up some boundaries or walls between all those different categories, but I imagine the lines oftentimes do blur. Would you say that to be the case?
Yeah, so we have a standing meeting every Tuesday. I can see it right on my other screen right now on my calendar. We have a standing meeting for 60, often runs just to 90 minutes on Tuesday. That's our business meeting. We do talk about things that kind of get pushed to the side, whether it be something regarding my son or his school or whatever. But by and large, that's when we can both sit down and we know what the subjects are going to be. Something that's going to be business related. We talk about marketing for the shop or what's going on in Durham, what's going on with this, that, and also just kind of check in with each other on some of those sorts of things. So I'll say that's the first thing. She is better than me. She'll pretty much cut it off in the evening, just with the nature of what we all do. Sometimes I'm not able to do that, especially if I'm waiting on, if we're trying to get financing for a deal and the lender's calling you at 6:30. If you've ever worked with a banker and you're listening to this, if your banker calls you at 6:30, you better pick it up because you may not talk to them again for 2 more days. Right. And you just have to, those are some calls you have to take, but if I know that there's a call coming in, I've gotten a lot better about this. And if we're eating dinner, I say, hey, I don't have anything else on my calendar tonight, but I am expecting a call from XYZ. And if that comes in the middle of this meal here, I'm going to have to step up. I'm going to have to go take the call. And I'm not exactly sure how long it'll take. Could be 5 minutes, could be half an hour. And I think that the anticipation that the call may come in, that I may have to step up, is different than me just whipping my phone out and being like, hey, got to run and take this, because it's,
Yeah, setting the expectations
yeah.
is critical.
Yep. And I still, even if I'm having to catch up from the day, computer work or this or that, that's usually more so me than her, but we're still not going to sit down and get into a meaty conversation around business. And typically after, dinner time's prepared, we try to just leave that for the next day. If she's got something she has to do, she does that independently, as do I. Aside from that, we just try to hang with little man and, focus on him for the evening until he goes to bed. So it's not easy, guys. It's not perfect, obviously. I think everybody knows that. There's times when there's extenuating circumstances, or there's, we have businesses that close after we close up, so to speak. So, if things pop up that we have to jump on, then we do. And that, Michelle does it, God bless her, but I don't expect her to be freaking picking up the phone at 8 o'clock at night, for a manager that's having a problem closing out a register in a cafe. You know what I mean? That is not what is in her duty role. So we do a lot of that stuff. When it pops up, which thankfully it's not that often, so it's not that big a deal in the grand scheme of things.
No, that's cool. And it's fun to see you guys have that working relationship and kind of have your guidelines and make it work, quite frankly.
The one business that she would never work with me again is that when I first got into Northwestern, went full time, and I was really running out of the gates. She was managing a hair salon in Greensboro, and I said, I need some help. But I think at the time, this was 2000. I think this is late 2012. I went full time in August that year, actually. And she's probably making 30 grand, something like that, maybe 35 grand, somewhere in that area. And I didn't know how to hire staff. So I was like, hey, I need some help. Not sure what to do. I've got enough money coming in where I can cover the household, but what I'd rather not do is, me make this money and then just give it all back to an assistant, because I wasn't at the point yet where the revenue was so good that I didn't have to think about that aspect. And so she quit her job and came and worked with me. And that lasted for about a month and a half. And she went back to doing something else. But I mean, you know how it is. You're just like running around the chicken with your head cut off, and you're throwing papers down your assistant's desk. You're like, hey, get this in case notes, and I'm heading out to the next one. It's just chaotic. And I don't think that's a side of me she prefers to see all the time. She knows how I operate during the daytime. I can be like more like a robot or a machine. I'm cranking stuff out, and I will chew up anything that gets in my way. And that's another challenge, obviously, is to completely flip the switch on that when you go home. So I try to get in that mindset before I go in the house as best I can. So I'm not that way, but it's dependent on the day.
Well, I noticed that too, sometimes because Kennedy and I both work from home, and if I'm in work mode and I'm like sharing something with her, telling her about something, I'm like very direct in work mode, and it's not received well. So I can
Sure. Yeah.
imagine if you guys were actually working together in that setup, how that can get pretty old pretty quick.
Oh man, there's times too. If I do work from the house from time to time, but there's times when she'll kind of be wandering around the house and will hear me on a phone call. I mean, a good example would be if we're trying to get a deal closed next week, and a lender says I need to show X amount of cash in liquid form for the closing, even though I don't have to send it in, and I don't have that much, or it's not where it needs to be, whatever. And then or they change the term on me 3 days before closing. I get nasty on the phone. Like I'm not cursing people out, stuff like that. But I'm just letting people know that there's a lot of other lenders that would love to get $30 million worth of loans done in the next 2 years with me. And if they get to the point where they feel like that they don't want that, just to let me know, and I will happily walk next door.
I'm
And
laughing because my wife
you
would
know,
just chuckle and say that that is me 2.0 as well. Direct
yeah,
conversations I thrive at.
yeah. And I'll leave the conversation. Hey, look, appreciate your time. I really hope you have a great day. That's the end of the conversation. But during the conversation, it is I understand you guys have the money, but I'm bringing the terms here to a good degree. They're only going to bend so much, but normally, they've seen we've done, I don't know, 35 projects in the last 3 years. They with no issues of them getting paid back ever. They'll normally say, let me see what I can do. And then somehow the closing just happens. Right. It's just the way that it
Yeah,
ends up working. So those are good relationships to have, obviously. So that's why we continue to work with them.
for sure. Um, well, Alan, this has been great. I got two questions to wrap up. So one, we ask all of our guests about a book that's had an impact on them as a way to distill a reading list for the folks who are tuning in. What's a book that's had an impact on you, and what was that impact that was had?
Yeah, the most recent one I read, I don't remember where I'd heard about it, but I got it immediately. It was called Profit First. And honestly, I don't even remember who wrote the book, but it'll come up if you search it. Profit First. And the subtitle to that is How to Turn Your Business into a profit machine instead of a cash eating business. And without spoiling the whole book, like a lot of the principles are super basic, but they're things that you just don't think about actually implementing because you have roadblocks in your own mind, like setting up separate accounts for moving profit over, whether there's profit there or not. And then you kind of have this, if you do have a hole that month, you still have a hole to fill, but you were able to move some profit to the side. So there's a lot of synonymous things in there that he talks about, but it's a really good shift on thinking and mindset. So I think that whether you have a profitable business or not, um, structuring your business in the way that he was thinking about it is just it compartmentalizes every single dollar that comes into your business and has a name for every dollar that comes in. Doesn't matter what level of business you're at or where you are. Phenomenal book. It changed the way that I operated some things. We changed some things around with our bike shop for this, and I've known some noticeable differences. And part of that I think goes along too is just not selling yourself short, right? Like swapping money, especially if you're in retail or probably even in financial services, right? If you're going to have a fee-based financial plan, it's like, don't be discounting everything all the time because you still have time going in. You're literally just working yourself backward. And, you want to work with people that really see your value as long as you're actually putting out the value that you tell them, that you're going to put out. And so there's a lot of that kind of thing in there too. And then, yeah, that was huge.
Yeah, outside of that specific takeaway, the takeaway that I got from what you just shared is if you're going to spend the time reading something, spend the time implementing what you learned, and it can
Yes.
have lasting change. And it already has for you. For folks who are interested in learning more about the fund, where do they connect with you? Where do they find you?
Yeah, I think the easiest place is probably seasidecapitalpartners.com. There's an inquiry thing at the top where it'll say invest with us. And a disclosure, just because you click that does not mean you're going to be able to invest with us. Happy to build a relationship with you, learn about you, make sure that if this is something you want to do, that it's completely suitable. But we very much so abide by the SEC guidelines for 506B private offerings. And we genuinely have to get to know you so that we can make the right decision for you to let you into the fund. But I'm meeting people every day, right? So it's not a big secret. You develop new relationships every single day. So all that is okay. But someone that inquires today, I'm not going to accept a check or a wire from you next week, maybe not even next month. But I think it'd be a good way for us to start a relationship, learn about you and your business. So that's my disclosure on that front. Because you're not supposed to, we cannot outwardly market for money to come in, but we absolutely can develop new relationships so that when the time is right for both the investor and the fund, that is something that could be of conversation 110%. So it's seasidecapitalpartners.com. Same on Instagram too. We don't have a Facebook account, but you can track some of our projects, and we throw up some information into that's useful for the end user on Instagram as well.
Love it.
Awesome.
Well, Alan, we appreciate the time. For those of you who are listening in, we appreciate your time as well. And I mean, we'll be in touch. We talk all the time anyways. Plus,
absolutely,
you have my money, so I'll be bothering you.
That's
seeing
right.
What's up?
Yes.
Alan,
Love
thank
it.
you.
Well, I'm excited
Appreciate
to be on,
it.
guys. This is awesome. Y'all have a great structure, and I'll be looking forward to hearing more episodes, and obviously this one that comes out too.
Appreciate it. Also, just
brother.
as a quick plug, if you want to hear more from Alan, we alluded to it earlier. He was on another podcast, but I just think the name is so creative and clever. It's called Whiskey and Wisdom. So if you search Whiskey and Wisdom, that podcast, scroll down, find Alan, you'll be able to hear from him again. So feel free to check that out, and certainly please share this episode out as well. Awesome. See you guys.
Who knew I would make it this far? They hated, they never believed me. Yeah, I would never drop the ball. I know I make it look easy. Yeah, Mayweather with the defense. I don't care what a critic got to say. I got them picking up the pieces.